Raymond, hands on the desk.
I'm sorry, what did you just say to me?
The certificates you've been selling for cash.
Raymond Curtis Okafor was a dedicated Memphis building inspector with 17 years on the job. To federal investigators, he was something else entirely, and this footage captures the moment that 17-year career ends.
5 years, 29 properties, including a childcare center and a building where 2 people got burned.
Every inspection I conducted is documented on the official form.
A signature.
He would not get another certificate signed before agents seized his city truck. Within days, federal investigators would trace nearly $500,000 in bribes across 5 years and 29 commercial properties, some of them still occupied by the very people his signature was supposed to protect. 2 kitchen workers were already recovering from burns in a hospital across town, hurt by a fire suppression system that should have failed his inspection 18 months earlier. A day planner, a set of bank records, and 1 piece of parking garage surveillance were about to turn a quiet, well-liked city inspector into the center of a federal public corruption case. What started as one contractor's cash-filled envelope would end with the FBI's public corruption squad unraveling a 5-year scheme built entirely on a single man's signature. Here's a question I keep coming back to. Why does it always take so long for someone to say something? Share your theory below. And subscribe if you want to keep seeing these cases exposed. Raymond Curtis Okafor was born in 1970 in Memphis, Tennessee, the only son of a Nigerian immigrant father and an American mother. His father, Emmanuel Okafor, had trained as a civil engineer in Enugu, Nigeria, before immigrating to the United States in the mid-1960s, though his credentials never fully transferred, and he spent most of his career doing structural framing and concrete work for commercial contractors around Memphis. His mother taught 4th grade at a public elementary school in South Memphis for over 2 decades. As a boy, Raymond spent Saturdays on his father's job sites, handing him tools and watching him check rebar spacing with a tape measure before a concrete pour. His father used to tell him that a building only stands because somebody checked the numbers twice, and that the person doing the checking carried more responsibility than anyone holding a hammer. He graduated from Hamilton High School in 1988, where a construction technology elective taught by a retired contractor first showed him mechanical and structural drafting, and enrolled in a construction technology program at Southwest Tennessee Community College, working weekends as a laborer for a drywall subcontractor for $6 an hour to help pay for classes. After earning his associate's degree in 1991, he spent the next decade and a half working as a field superintendent for 2 different Memphis general contractors, running crews on retail build-outs and small commercial renovations across the city, eventually earning his Tennessee general contractor's license in 1998. In 2007, at 37 years old, he applied for an inspector position with the City of Memphis Department of Construction and Development Services, drawn by the stability of a city salary and a pension after years of inconsistent construction industry paychecks. He started as a residential inspector at $1,000 a year, was cross-trained on commercial electrical and fire suppression code within 3 years, and was promoted to senior commercial building inspector in 2014. A role that gave him sole sign-off authority on final certificates of occupancy for commercial projects across Midtown and downtown Memphis. Supervisor evaluations from that period describe him as thorough, noting his inspection reports were among the most detailed in the division, and praising his ability to work independently with minimal oversight. A level of trust that came directly from years without a single formal complaint filed against him. A 2016 performance review specifically credited him with catching a structural framing error on a downtown high-rise renovation that, left uncorrected, could have compromised an entire floor's load capacity. He and his wife Denise, whom he met at a mutual friend's cookout in 1995, raised 2 children in a brick ranch home in the Berclair neighborhood that they bought in 2003. And slowly renovated themselves over the following decade. He coached a youth flag football league on Saturday mornings for 6 years and was known at his church for organizing the men's group's annual fish fry, a fundraiser that by 2022 was pulling in several hundred people a year. By any outward measure, Raymond Okafor was exactly the kind of person a city department would want holding sole authority over whether a building was safe to open its doors. Therefore, nothing about his file, his reputation, or his 17 years of service gave anyone a reason to look closer. That, as it turned out, was the entire point. The City of Memphis Department of Construction and Development Services oversees permitting and inspection for every commercial construction project within city limits, processing several thousand permit applications a year across residential and commercial categories. Before any commercial building, whether a restaurant, an apartment complex, or a child care center, can legally open its doors, it must pass a final inspection and receive a certificate of occupancy. The process works like this. A general contractor completes construction according to approved plans, then requests a final inspection covering structural, electrical, mechanical, and fire suppression systems. A single inspector, assigned based on geographic zone and project type, walks the site, checks each system against code, and either issues a certificate of occupancy or files a list of deficiencies the contractor must correct before resubmitting. For commercial properties in Midtown and downtown Memphis, that inspector, for 17 years, was almost always Raymond Okafor. The department's staffing model concentrated senior commercial sign-off authority in a small handful of inspectors. A structure designed for consistency and expertise, since it meant fewer inspectors developing deep familiarity with a smaller set of neighborhoods rather than a rotating cast of generalists learning each corridor from scratch. It also meant that for large sections of the city's commercial corridor, one man's signature was the only thing standing between a building and the public that would walk through its doors. Inspections themselves were not independently reviewed. A supervisor might spot-check paperwork for completeness, but nobody rewalked a site an inspector had already signed off on unless a specific complaint triggered it. Certificates of occupancy, once issued, were treated internally as settled matters. The system trusted its inspectors completely because the alternative, doubling every inspection, would have doubled the department's cost and slowed every commercial project in the city. That trust is what made the certificate of occupancy valuable to more than just the tenants who relied on it. It made Raymond Okafor's signature worth money to any contractor who did not want to spend the time or expense fixing what an honest inspection would have cost. And because his zone covered some of the most active commercial redevelopment in the city, the volume of projects passing across his desk each year gave him more opportunities than almost any other inspector in the department. The first documented payment traced back to 2019, when a general contractor finishing a downtown mixed-use retail and residential conversion approached Okafor directly about a fire-rated drywall assembly in an egress stairwell that had been installed short of code. Rather than filing a deficiency notice that would have cost the contractor an estimated $40,000 in rework and weeks of delay, Okafor accepted $3,000 in cash and signed off on the building as compliant. Word moved quietly through Memphis's small commercial contracting community. Over the next 5 years, 4 different licensed general contractors developed a working arrangement with Okafor, understanding that a cash payment, scaled to the severity of what needed to be overlooked, could resolve a deficiency far faster and cheaper than an honest correction. Payments ranged from $3,000 for a relatively minor electrical issue to as much as $15,000 on projects with multiple serious violations. The deficiencies Okafor overlooked were not cosmetic. Investigators would later document egress stairwells with inadequate fire-rated drywall assemblies, fire suppression sprinkler heads installed at incorrect coverage spacing that left sections of a building unprotected, electrical panels with undersized service conductors and double-tapped breakers that created genuine fire risk, and structural steel connections installed without an engineer of record sign-off, meaning nobody with the authority to verify the building's structural integrity had actually done so. On at least 4 occasions between 2021 and 2023, Okafor issued certificates of occupancy for the same contractor within days of an initial deficiency notice he himself had filed, a pattern investigators would later flag as one of the clearest indicators in the entire 5-year record, since a genuine correction of structural steelwork simply could not have happened in the time frame the paperwork claimed. Okafor developed a system to move the money without it looking like what it was. In 2018, he registered a home renovation sole proprietorship in his brother-in-law's name, then issued himself fictitious invoices for consultation and materials that were never provided, depositing contractor cash into the business account and giving it the appearance of legitimate income. Between 2019 and 2024, bank records would later show 28 deposits into that account, totaling $487,000, with no corresponding legitimate business activity. He kept his own records too, a habit that would ultimately work against him. A day planner recovered from his city-issued vehicle contained contractor names, property addresses, payment amounts, and inspection dates, all written in a shorthand he apparently believed was private enough to be safe. He used the money carefully, never in ways that would draw attention inside the department. A portion went toward his daughter's out-of-state college tuition starting in 2021. Another portion covered a kitchen renovation on the Berclair house that neighbors assumed had been paid for the same way he'd paid for everything else over the years, slowly, out of a city inspector's salary. One junior inspector, newly assigned to shadow Okafor on a handful of commercial walkthroughs in 2022, later told investigators she remembered feeling uneasy about how quickly certain inspections wrapped up compared to others, but had assumed it reflected his 17 years of experience rather than anything else, and never reported the discrepancy. The scheme escalated steadily rather than dramatically. What began as one stairwell in 2019 grew to 29 fraudulent certificates of occupancy issued across 5 years, covering an occupied mixed-use apartment building, a licensed childcare center, and 2 restaurants among other commercial properties throughout Midtown and downtown Memphis. Nobody at the department noticed a pattern because there was no mechanism built to notice one. Certificates of occupancy were issued, filed, and forgotten. The buildings opened, tenants moved in, customers ate dinner, parents dropped their children off at daycare, and the deficiencies stayed exactly where Okafor had left them. In October 2024, a grease fire broke out in the kitchen of a Midtown restaurant during the Friday dinner rush. Under normal circumstances, the kitchen's fire suppression hood system should have activated within seconds, smothering the flame before it could spread beyond the cooking line. Instead, the system failed to trigger at all. The fire spread across the hood and into the ventilation ductwork faster than kitchen staff could contain it with handheld extinguishers. 2 employees suffered burns severe enough to require hospitalization before firefighters arrived and brought the blaze under control. One of them, a 22-year-old line cook, spent 9 days in the hospital's burn unit. The restaurant remained closed for months afterward for repairs, and the owner, who had opened the location only 2 years earlier, later told a local reporter he had trusted the city's certificate of occupancy the same way he trusted his health inspector's grade card, without a second thought. Memphis fire marshal investigators, examining the failed suppression system as part of the standard post-fire investigation, discovered the sprinkler heads inside the hood had been installed at incorrect coverage spacing, a defect that should never have passed a proper final inspection. When investigators pulled the property's file, they found a certificate of occupancy on record bearing Raymond Okafor's signature, issued 18 months earlier. The fire marshal's office referred the discrepancy to the Memphis Office of Inspector General rather than treating it as an isolated inspection error. Investigators there began by pulling every commercial certificate of occupancy Okafor had issued over the previous 5 years, a routine records review that, within weeks, revealed a pattern far larger than one restaurant's faulty hood system. That review would eventually be handed to the FBI's Public Corruption Squad, and what had started as 2 hospitalized kitchen workers became a federal bribery investigation spanning 29 properties. The FBI's Public Corruption Squad opened a formal investigation in November 2024, obtaining financial records, permitting files, and eventually court authorization for physical surveillance of Okafor's movements. On September 4, 2024, months earlier, as part of an already active preliminary inquiry into complaints from a rival contractor, FBI agents had captured surveillance footage from a parking garage on Union Avenue showing Okafor accepting a manila envelope from a contractor representative. 6 days later, records showed Okafor issued a certificate of occupancy for a downtown mixed-use project. An independent structural engineer, hired by federal investigators, later assessed that same property and found 4 active code violations, none of which appeared anywhere in Okafor's final inspection paperwork. Bank records subpoenaed from the home renovation business account showed the 28 deposits totaling $487,000 between 2019 and 2024, with account statements showing no invoices, no material purchase receipts, and no client contracts to support any of it as legitimate income. The day planner recovered from Okafor's city-issued vehicle during a subsequent search became one of the investigation's most damning pieces of evidence, cross-referencing cleanly against both the bank deposits and the fraudulent certificates. Investigators matched contractor initials in the planner's shorthand to specific payment amounts and specific properties, filling in a timeline Okafor had unintentionally documented for them. One of the 4 contractors, facing his own exposure, agreed to cooperate early in the investigation, providing a recorded statement describing how the arrangement worked and confirming he had personally paid Okafor on 11 separate occasions. His cooperation gave prosecutors a witness who could explain, in plain terms, exactly what the shorthand in the day planner meant. Investigators also obtained text messages between Okafor and one of the contractors, recovered from a phone seized under a separate warrant. Contractor: same as last time on the Union Ave job? Okafor: depends what's still open when I get there. Contractor: panel in the stairwell, nothing structural. Okafor: 8 then. Cash: same as always. The smoking gun was the September 4th surveillance footage itself, cross-referenced against the certificate issued 6 days later and the structural engineer's independent findings. It was the one piece of evidence that connected a specific cash payment directly to a specific fraudulent sign-off, with a paper trail on both ends. On November 14th, 2024, at 7:15 in the morning, FBI agents and Memphis Office of Inspector General Investigators approached Okafor in the driveway of his Berclair home as he loaded his city truck for the day. "Raymond Okafor, we need to talk with you about your certificates of occupancy," the lead agent said. He set down his travel mug slowly. "I've been doing this job 17 years. Every building I sign off on, I stand behind." September 4th. A parking garage on Union Avenue. "We have you on camera." His jaw tightened, but his voice stayed even. "You don't understand how backed up that department is. If I flagged every minor issue, half of Midtown would still be under construction. Sprinkler heads installed wrong aren't minor. 2 people are recovering from burns right now because of one of your signatures. I inspected hundreds of buildings a year for 17 years. You cannot hold one restaurant against my entire career. We're not talking about one restaurant. We're talking about 29. For the first time, he didn't have an answer ready. He looked past the agent toward his own front door, where his wife had just stepped outside. "I want my attorney before I say anything else," he said, his voice quieter than it had been 30 seconds earlier. He was placed in handcuffs in his own driveway at 7:22 a.m., in view of the house he had spent 17 years of city paychecks and 5 years of something else paying for. "We're heading into the trial now. If you want to know exactly how the system handled this, subscribe. We break down every detail. Federal prosecutors in the Western District of Tennessee charged Okafor with bribery of a public official, honest services wire fraud, and conspiracy to defraud the city of Memphis. A federal grand jury returned the indictment in January 2025. Assistant United States Attorneys Denise Callahan and Marcus Webb led the prosecution. The 4 contractors involved in the scheme were charged separately. 3 pleaded guilty to bribery-related counts in exchange for cooperation, ultimately receiving sentences ranging from 14 to 36 months. The cooperating contractor, whose recorded statement had helped investigators decode the day planner, received the lowest sentence among them. Okafor initially pleaded not guilty, but with the September 4th surveillance footage, the day planner, the recovered text messages, and 28 cross-referenced bank deposits forming a case his attorney privately conceded was difficult to overcome at trial, he accepted a plea agreement in April 2025, pleading guilty to all 3 charges rather than risk a jury verdict. His attorney had filed a pretrial motion arguing the parking garage surveillance violated his reasonable expectation of privacy, a motion the court denied after finding the footage was captured from a publicly accessible vantage point. At sentencing, the owner of the child care center, whose certificate of occupancy had been fraudulently issued, addressed the court. "I trusted that piece of paper with other people's children," she said. "I had no way of knowing that trust had a price, and that somebody had already decided it was worth less than a bribe." The judge sentenced Okafor to 84 months in federal prison, ordered forfeiture of the full $487,000 in bribery proceeds, and ordered an additional $210,000 in restitution to the city of Memphis to help offset the estimated $1.7 million needed to bring the 29 affected properties into code compliance. In her sentencing statement, the judge said Okafor had turned a position built entirely on public trust into a private toll booth, and that the two hospitalized kitchen workers represented, in her words, the exact harm the inspection process exists to prevent. Okafor is currently serving his sentence at a federal correctional institution, with all 29 properties tied to his fraudulent sign-offs now undergoing court-ordered remediation inspections by independent engineers hired by the city.